stretching for thousands of miles across mountains, deserts, and valleys. The Great Wall of China is one of the most recognizable landmarks on Earth. We imagine its endless stones, winding over peaks like the spine of a giant dragon. But the wall was never just a wall. It was a world of its own, a place where soldiers stood watch through freezing nights, where merchants and villagers lived in its shadow, where messengers carried news from tower to tower, and where countless forgotten hands shaped stones that still stand today. Behind its famous silhouette are untold stories. Stories of ordinary people who built it, guarded it, and lived beside it. Stories of endurance, struggle, and survival. For while the wall is remembered as a symbol of power, its true history is written in the daily lives of those who kept it alive. Workers who carved stones, guards who faced loneliness and silence, families who tried to build homes beneath its shadow. Tonight, we will walk slowly along its ridges and step into the forgotten corners of its past. We will not rush into tales of kings and emperors. Instead, we will listen to the quiet voices of the people who lived closest to the wall, the ones who left no monuments, but whose lives gave the wall meaning. Before we begin, take a deep breath, let your thoughts grow calm, and prepare for a journey through stone, wind, and silence. And if you find peace in these quiet travels through history, remember to leave a like and subscribe, so you will not miss the next story waiting in the stillness of time. Now, let us begin the untold stories of the Great Wall of China, the stories that history forgot, but which still whisper through its endless stones. To see the Great Wall for the first time is to witness something that almost does not seem possible. Stones stretch in both directions, climbing mountains and vanishing into distant mist. From a distance it appears unbroken, like the spine of the earth itself, coiling endlessly toward horizons that cannot be reached. But as awe-inspiring as the wall looks from afar, its reality up close was very different. It was not only a monument, but also a workplace, a home, a burden, and a daily reality for the countless ordinary people who lived in its shadow. Imagine yourself as a traveler centuries ago, approaching one of its sections for the first time. The road is rough, your feet are sore, the wind pulls at your robe. As you turn a bend, you see it, massive stones stacked high, steps carved into the slope, watchtowers jutting upward against the sky. You pause, your breath catching, not only from exhaustion, but from astonishment. The wall seems eternal, beyond human effort. And yet, as you step closer, you begin to notice the details, the cracks where mortar has worn thin, the rough texture of stones that bear the marks of chisels, the uneven patches where repairs have been made hastily. It is here that the wall becomes human again, no longer only a monument, but a collection of the hands that shaped it. For the soldiers stationed on the wall, this sight was not a wonder, but a routine. To them, the wall was not endless. It was a stretch of stone they were responsible for. They climbed its steps daily, patrolled its ridges in wind and snow, stood in its towers staring into the distance for hours that felt like years. Their lives were measured not by the wall's grandeur, but by its monotony, the sound of boots on stone, the weight of armor, the silence of nights broken only by the whistle of wind. Anime often lingers on such silences, a guard standing alone against a vast horizon, a figure dwarfed by the structure behind him. These images are rooted in the reality of men who lived with the wall not as symbol, but as duty. For villagers, The wall was a constant presence that shaped their daily rhythms. To live near, it meant to hear the footsteps of soldiers, to see the shadow of towers stretching across fields, to carry goods up steep slopes to sell or trade. Children grew up playing in its shadow, using its stones as backdrops for their games. Farmers worked fields made harsher by the stones dragged from them to build the wall. Women carried water up and down paths, balancing jars while the wall loomed above, reminding them always of the authority it represented. To them, the wall was not distant grandeur, but a neighbor, sometimes protective, sometimes oppressive, always unavoidable dot. And then there were the builders. For them, the wall was not a sight to admire or a backdrop to live beside. It was a task that consumed their bodies. Many were conscripted, forced to labor under harsh conditions, carrying heavy stones, mixing soil and straw, hauling bricks up slopes so steep that even animals stumbled. Their sweat darkened the ground, their hands blistered and bled, their voices hoarse from effort. They slept in rough camps, ate meager rations, and woke to endless days of lifting, dragging, and building. For these people, the Great Wall was not an eternal wonder. It was exhaustion and survival. Their lives became part of its mortar, their strength laid into its foundation at dusk. When the sun set behind the mountains, the wall transformed again. Its stones glowed gold, its shadows lengthened across valleys, and its towers stood like silent guardians against the sky. For travelers, this was the moment to pause and take in its beauty. For soldiers, it was the start of long night watches. For villagers, it was a reminder to return home before darkness made the roads unsafe. And for laborers, it was simply another day's end, one step closer to collapse, one step closer to becoming forgotten. The Great Wall then was never just one thing. It was awe and burden, beauty and suffering, symbol and reality. To outsiders, it looked eternal. To those who lived with it, it was fragile, demanding constant repairs, swallowing endless labor. To emperors, it was power. To soldiers, it was duty. To villagers, it was landscape. To builders, it was hardship. And within all these perspectives lies the truth of why the wall endures in memory. It was not just stone. It was human lives, human stories, human endurance stacked higher than mountains dot. So when we look at the wall today, whether in photographs, in person, or through the frames of anime-inspired art, what we see is not only a monument. We see the untold stories it holds, the forgotten voices carried in its stones, the lives of countless ordinary people whose presence made it possible. The endless wall is not only an endless line of stone, it is an endless line of memory stretching from past to present, whispering still to anyone who stops to listen. To stand on the Great Wall of China as a soldier centuries ago was not to see a wonder of the world, but to feel the weight of endless duty. The stones beneath your feet were rough and uneven. The wind cut across your face, and the horizon stretched wider than your eyes could follow. The view was breathtaking, yes, but not in the way of travelers. For you, it was a reminder of responsibility. Every ridge, every valley, every open plain below was a place from which danger could rise, and every moment of silence was heavy with the possibility that it might end without warning. The life of a soldier on the wall was built on routine, and yet every routine was sharpened by the tension of vigilance. Dawn began early, often before the sun crested the mountains. trumpets or wooden clappers roused the men from their mats, their breath white in the morning air. They dressed quickly, wrapping rough robes or armor against the chill, strapping swords to their belts, shouldering bows and quivers. Some were veterans, their movements practiced and unhurried. Others were young and new, fumbling with straps, still half lost in sleep. Together they filed out to their posts, climbing the steep stone steps to towers that stood like watchful eyes above the land. The first task was always the same, scanning the horizon. Soldiers leaned against crenellated walls, their eyes narrowing into the distance, searching for movement among trees or across open plains. Most mornings brought nothing but the sight of mist lifting from valleys, of birds rising into the sky, of farmers beginning work in distant fields. And yet no soldier could relax. To miss a movement, to fail to notice a shadow, could mean disaster for an entire garrison, even for villages lying just beyond the walls. Their duty was patience, and patience required endurance stronger than any sword. The silence of the wall was both companion and enemy. Hours stretched long when nothing happened, the stones heating under the sun until they burned through sandals, or freezing at night until they cracked beneath the frost. Conversations grew hushed, then ceased, as soldiers settled into a rhythm of waiting. Some carved lines into wood to count days. Others sang softly to themselves, their voices carried away by the wind. Many simply stood, their thoughts drifting far beyond the horizon, imagining families left behind, lives that might have been lived elsewhere. Anime often shows quiet figures staring into distance, their eyes reflecting 1,000 unspoken thoughts. This image was born on the wall, where silence was both endless and inescapable. Meals were simple, practical, and never enough. Soldiers ate dried grains, salted vegetables, and occasionally meat brought up from villages below. Food had to last, carried up steep paths or stored in towers for weeks at a time. Water came from barrels hauled with difficulty, their weight a burden on those who carried them. Eating was not pleasure, but necessity, a brief pause before returning to the grind of watch and patrol. And yet, even in these small meals, there was comfort. Men gathered in groups, passing bowls, trading stories, laughing quietly at jokes that broke the monotony. These small human moments lit the otherwise heavy days, like lanterns flickering in long corridors of stone. Training filled some of the time, though even training grew weary after weeks and months. Soldiers practiced archery, their arrows thudding into straw targets, the rhythm steady but endless. They drilled with spears and swords, their shouts echoing against stone walls. Sweat soaked their clothes, their muscles ached, but the repetition built strength and skill. These drills were not only preparation but also distraction, a way to fight the creeping dullness of endless waiting. Still, no amount of practice could erase the loneliness of being stationed far from home, often for years, often with no certainty of when or if return would come. At night, the wall was a different world. Darkness fell quickly, and with it came a cold that pierced through armor and cloth. Torches flickered along the battlements, their flames bending in the wind, casting long shadows across the stone. Soldiers walked slowly between them, boots scuffing, hands tight on weapons. Every sound became sharper, the rustle of grass, the cry of an animal, the snap of a branch. Each could be harmless, but each could also be warning. To spend a night on the wall was to live between fear and endurance, your body weary, your eyes refusing to close. Many soldiers learned to live with this tension, their nerves stretched, but never breaking, their calm as much a weapon as their swords. Not all nights were tense. Some were filled with moments of beauty that even weary men could not ignore. The moon would rise, casting silver light across the ridges, making the wall glow like a pale ribbon draped across the mountains. Stars glittered in countless numbers, clearer than any seen in towns below. Their light cold but steady. Soldiers leaned on their spears, looking upward, their breath slowing, their hearts quieting. In those moments, the wall was not only burden but also place of wonder, a stage from which the universe itself could be seen. These moments gave strength, reminding men that there was more to life than duty, more than silence, more than waiting dot, and then there were storms. Rain lashed against stone, soaking clothes, turning paths to rivers. Snow piled in drifts, heavy and unyielding, freezing hands until they could barely hold weapons. Winds roared across the battlements, pushing men sideways, threatening to hurl them into darkness. To endure such storms was to be tested beyond strength, to cling to the wall, not as guardian, but as survivor. Many fell ill, some never rose again. Their names faded, their graves unmarked, their lives swallowed by the wall they had guarded. Anime remembers this fragility too, showing heroes who stand against impossible storms, who endure not because they are unbreakable, but because they refuse to give in. Perhaps the greatest challenge was not weather or hunger, but loneliness. Soldiers often came from distant villages, torn from families, serving for years with little chance to return. Letters traveled slowly, if at all. News of home might arrive months late or never. Many carried small tokens, a carving, a scrap of cloth, a lock of hair, as reminders of those waiting far away. These tokens became lifelines, objects touched in silence when the night grew too long, when the horizon felt too empty. The loneliness of the wall was deep, and yet it shaped men into figures of endurance, their spirits honed by separation, their loyalty bound to one another in the face of isolation in time. Even soldiers who longed to leave grew bound to the wall. Its stones became familiar, its routines became habit, its silence became something they could not imagine living without. They became part of the wall, their lives folded into its endless line. Their footsteps wore grooves into stairs, their hands smoothed stones, their voices filled towers that otherwise would have been empty. The wall did not live without them, and they did not live without it. So when we think of the Great Wall today, stretching across mountains like an eternal symbol, we must also remember the men who stood upon it, who gave it life through their silence, their patience, their survival. Their stories are not carved into its stones, but they remain, whispered in the cracks, carried by the wind, remembered in every anime scene where a lone figure stands guard against a horizon that never ends. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself on the wall centuries ago. The torches flicker, the stones are cold beneath your feet, the horizon is endless. You are tired, lonely, but still you stand, watching, waiting, surviving. This is what it meant to live on the wall, to endure silence, to find strength in stillness, and to survive where only patience could win. To stand on the Great Wall and look outward is to see vast landscapes stretching endlessly, mountains folding into valleys, rivers glinting in sunlight, plains rippling with grass. But if you turned inward toward the base of the wall, you would find something smaller, humbler, and more essential: villages. Scattered clusters of homes nestled in valleys or along dirt roads. Built of packed earth and timber, their thatched roofs patched again and again by careful hands. These were the places where families lived, where life continued quietly beneath the looming presence of stone. The Great Wall might have been the focus of emperors, generals, and soldiers, but for countless ordinary people, it was simply a neighbor, vast, unyielding, and inescapable. Imagine a village at dawn, tucked against the shadow of the wall. The first light of day paints the stones above in soft gold, but below, life begins in a different rhythm. Smoke rises slowly from small chimneys as families light their hearths. Roosters crow, dogs bark, children stir from straw mats, their eyes still heavy with sleep. Mothers carry buckets to wells, balancing the weight carefully as they return to pour water into clay jars. Fathers step into fields, hose slung over their shoulders, walking barefoot along narrow paths to check seedlings or tend to animals. The wall looms silently above, but the villagers pay it little mind. To them it has always been there, as natural as the mountains or rivers, something unchanging in a world where their own lives shifted. With each season, the houses themselves were simple but resourceful. Walls of earth pressed tightly together, wooden beams cut from nearby forests, straw roofs that had to be renewed after storms or heavy snow. Inside, one room often served many purposes: a place to cook, to eat, to sleep, to gather in the evenings. Mats were spread at night and rolled in the morning, meals cooked over small fires that smoked and hissed. Children played with carved wooden toys or stones, their laughter echoing through narrow alleys between houses. Chickens scratched at the ground, goats bleated softly, oxen chewed patiently as they waited for the day's labor. All of it unfolded beneath the silent gaze of towers above, where soldiers walked their endless patrols. The wall shaped these villages in subtle but constant ways. Its presence brought soldiers who needed food, water, and supplies. Farmers sold grain, vegetables, and meat to garrisons, earning coin or favors. Women washed clothes for soldiers, carried water up to towers, or prepared food for patrols. Markets grew near the wall's gates, small gatherings of stalls where villagers sold what they could spare and bought what they could not make. The economy of entire regions bent around the wall, for where it stood, people gathered, traded, and adapted. Anime reflects this when it shows villages thriving beneath imposing fortresses or great structures, ordinary families living in the shadows of monumental power. Life in these villages was not easy. Winters could be cruel, winds howling down from mountains, snow piling against homes, frost biting into skin. Families huddled together for warmth, wrapping themselves in patched robes, sharing bowls of hot broth stretched thin by scarcity. Summers brought a different hardship: blazing heat, dust rising from fields, sweat-soaking clothes as farmers bent over crops. The wall stood through it all, indifferent to human suffering, a silent backdrop that never changed. And yet, in its shadow, people endured, finding joy in small things. A harvest that came early, a festival night with lanterns glowing, a child's first steps in the dust. Children growing up near the wall often saw it as a playground as much as a presence. They climbed its lower slopes, daring one another to touch its stones. running along the paths that wound toward its towers. They listened to soldiers' stories, eyes wide at tales of battles fought long ago, though few such battles ever touched their own lives. They collected feathers, carved sticks into toys, chased animals across fields. Their laughter floated upward, reaching the ears of tired soldiers who sometimes smiled quietly, reminded of families far away. In anime, children playing near grand structures or forging small adventures in the shadow of larger forces capture exactly this blend of innocence and resilience. The wall also shaped the psychology of these villagers. Living so close to something so vast meant living always with a reminder of power beyond their control. For some, it was reassuring, a sign of safety and protection. For others, it was oppressive, a constant weight above their heads. But over generations, the wall simply became part of the landscape, no more surprising than the hills. People built their homes against it, planted fields along its base, let their animals graze in its shadow. It was not separate from their lives, but entwined with them, part of the rhythm of daily existence. Festivals brought relief and joy. When harvests ended, or when the seasons turned, villagers decorated their streets with lanterns, played flutes and drums, and danced in circles beneath the gaze of towers. Soldiers sometimes joined, stepping down from their duties for a night of laughter, sharing cups of warm drink, trading songs with villagers. These moments dissolved the line between the wall and the village, between the guardians above and the families below. The memory of these nights lingers in anime festival scenes, where light and joy glow against a backdrop of looming structures. Yet danger was never far. Bandits roamed the countryside, storms destroyed crops, illnesses spread quickly in close quarters. When such hardships came, the wall offered little direct help. Soldiers guarded their posts, lords remained distant, and survival fell once again on the villagers themselves. They leaned on neighbors, shared food, rebuilt homes together, cared for the sick. This resilience became their greatest strength, a quiet heroism that anime continues to celebrate in depictions of ordinary people enduring extraordinary hardships. At night, when work was finished and fires dimmed, the villages grew quiet. Families lay close together in their rooms, listening to the sound of wind rattling the roofs, to dogs barking faintly, to soldiers' footsteps echoing above. Sometimes laughter drifted up from one house. Sometimes the cry of a baby pierced the silence. Sometimes only stillness reigned. The wall stood dark and vast, its towers black against the sky, its presence constant. For the families below, it was both protection and mystery, both burden and comfort. They did not question it. They simply lived with it, their lives woven into its shadow. So when we think of the Great Wall today, we must remember not only the emperors who ordered its building or the soldiers who guarded its stones, but also the countless families who lived at its feet. Their homes may have vanished, their names forgotten, but their lives gave the wall context, gave it humanity. Without them, the wall would have been an empty structure. With them, it became a lived space, a neighbor, a constant part of daily existence. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself in such a village. The day has ended, the fields are quiet, lanterns glow in doorways, and smoke rises softly into the night. Children laugh faintly before sleep. Neighbors call farewells across narrow paths. Animals settle in their pens. Above it all, the wall stretches silently, its towers dark, its stones endless. You are part of this world, small, ordinary, but vital, living beneath the shadow of greatness, shaping it with your presence even as it shapes you. When we gaze at the Great Wall today, it feels unshakable, almost eternal, as if it has always been part of the earth. Its stones seem larger than human strength, its ridges more enduring than human will. Yet every stone was lifted by hands, every path carved by bodies that bent and strained beneath loads too heavy for any one life. Behind the beauty and majesty of the wall are the forgotten builders, farmers conscripted after harvest, prisoners sent as punishment, laborers pressed into duty, artisans whose skills were demanded rather than offered. Their stories are seldom told, yet their sweat, their exhaustion, and their silence are the true mortar of the wall. Imagine the beginning of a workday centuries ago. Before dawn, men are woken by shouts, their blankets still damp from the night's chill. They rise stiffly, their backs aching from the day before, their hands blistered, their clothes worn thin. There is little time for food, only a bowl of grain or broth, sometimes not even that. Soon they are marched to the worksite, a stretch of mountain or ridge where piles of stone and earth wait. Supervisors bark orders, guards watch closely, and the day begins with the same rhythm it always does, lifting, carrying, stacking, pounding. Shaping dot, the stones are heavy, rough against skin. Men strain together to drag them upward, ropes cutting into shoulders, sweat dripping into eyes. Some stumble and fall, their cries quickly swallowed by the noise of labor. Others press on silently, too weary to speak. Each step upward feels endless, each load heavier than the last. Yet there is no choice but to continue. The wall demands labor, and labor must be given. By midday the sun beats down, turning stones hot enough to burn. Clothes cling to bodies, mouths dry with thirst, muscles cramp with strain. Still the work goes on dot at other sites. Earth and gravel are packed into wooden frames, layer upon layer tamped down until it hardens into walls. Workers swing heavy mallets in endless rhythm, their arms sore, their bodies vibrating with each strike. Dust rises in clouds, choking lungs, coating faces until every man looks the same, gray, tired, indistinguishable from one another. The monotony is crushing, yet it is broken only by the occasional shout of a supervisor or the crack of a whip meant to drive men faster. Evenings bring little relief. Workers return to rough camps of tents or shacks, collapsing onto mats of straw. Their meals are small. Rice if they are lucky, sometimes beans or vegetables, often only gruel thin enough to drink rather than chew. Fires flicker, men sit hunched, their voices low. Some speak of families far away, wondering if their children have grown, if their wives are safe, if their homes still stand. Others say nothing at all, staring into the flames, their thoughts too heavy to share. Fatigue hangs over everything like smoke. Then sleep takes them, not restful but necessary, before dawn comes again to demand more. For many, the wall was not only work but punishment. Prisoners of war, criminals, or men who had displeased local authorities were sent to labor camps along its length. These men carried the heaviest burdens, received the smallest rations, and often endured the harshest conditions. Many did not survive the seasons of work, their graves unmarked, their names erased. Yet their strength remained in the stones, in the layers of earth, in the endless ridges still standing. Their lives became part of the wall, absorbed into its silence. But not all builders were the same. Skilled artisans were also forced into service. Stone cutters who shaped blocks, carpenters who built scaffolds, blacksmiths who forged tools. Their work required precision, even artistry, yet it was done under pressure, with little recognition. A carved block might take hours of effort, only to be fitted silently into place and forgotten. A timber might be cut and smoothed, its beauty hidden forever beneath layers of stone. These men left no signatures, no marks of identity. Their only legacy was the durability of the wall itself. The environment made everything harder. On mountain ridges, air was thin, wind sharp, storms sudden. Men dragged stones up slopes, so steep that even animals faltered. In deserts, heat baked the ground, water was scarce, lips cracked, skin blistered. Some collapsed under the sun, their bodies carried aside, their absence barely noted. In forests, rain turned earth to mud, sucking at sandals, making every step a battle. And yet, work never stopped. The wall consumed seasons, years, decades, an appetite fed by endless human effort. What kept the builders moving was not choice, but compulsion. Orders from above demanded progress, and lives below had no power to resist. Still, within this harshness, glimpses of humanity survived. Men sang work songs to keep rhythm, their voices blending into something stronger than their bodies alone. They carved small figures from scraps of wood, tokens of hope, gifts to one another. They shared laughter and the rare moments of rest, jokes about guards, memories of better days. These sparks of life did not lessen the hardship, but they lit it briefly, reminding them of who they were beyond their labor. The wall's grandeur today hides the truth of this suffering. Tourists walk its ridges, marveling at views, taking photographs, imagining history in abstract. Few pause to consider the hands that lifted each stone, the bodies that bent beneath loads, the lives shortened by exhaustion. Yet without those forgotten workers, there would be no wall to admire. The monument stands because of them, because of their strength, their silence, their sacrifice. They are not remembered in names, but they are present in every stone. Anime sometimes remembers them in spirit, the nameless, workers who build cities in the background, the characters who labor without recognition, but whose presence supports the entire story. In every frame where a grand structure rises, where ordinary effort creates extraordinary beauty, there is an echo of these builders, men who gave everything and received nothing, men whose lives became stone. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself among them. The air is heavy with dust, your hands raw from rope, your body aching from effort. You stand on a ridge, a massive stone at your side, waiting to be lifted into place. Around you are others, their faces weary but determined, their voices murmuring songs to keep rhythm. The wall rises slowly, painfully, under your hands. You know your name will not be remembered, but you also know that the wall will stand long after you're gone. This is the legacy of the builders, forgotten but eternal, their strength written in stone across the spine of the earth. Along the endless length of the Great Wall, like beads strung on a vast thread, stand the watchtowers. From afar they look like small dots clinging to ridges, square silhouettes rising against mountains or fading into the haze of valleys. But up close, each tower was its own world, a place of vigilance, of waiting, of silence. For centuries, these towers were the eyes of the wall, gazing into the horizon, always searching, always watching. And within them lived the watchers, men who endured solitude, weather, and time, their lives bound to the view from above. Imagine climbing a steep stretch of stone steps, your breath ragged, your body heavy with armor and supplies. At the top, the tower rises before you. Solid stone walls, narrow windows, a roof flat against the sky. The air thins, the wind sharpens, the world spreads out around you. From this height you can see miles in every direction, forests rolling into plains, rivers cutting silver paths through valleys, mountains layered in shades of blue. It is beautiful, but it is not beauty you are here for. It is vigilance. Every patch of grass, every flicker of movement, every distant figure matters. For your task is not to enjoy the view, but to guard against what it might conceal. Inside, the tower is dim and narrow. Its walls are thick, the air cool and musty. The floor is hard stone, sometimes scattered with straw mats where men sit or sleep. Weapons lean in corners, bows strung tight, arrows in bundles, spears lined in rows. A small hearth smolders faintly, its smoke curling upward and out through vents. Supplies are stacked carefully, jars of grain, water in clay pots, bundles of firewood. Life here is pared down to essentials, stripped of comfort. The tower is not a home, but a post, a place where survival is practical, where every object has a purpose, every corner is filled with necessity. The watchers themselves are weary but sharp-eyed. They live in rotation, some standing at windows, others patrolling the roof, others resting briefly before taking their turn again. Their eyes strain against distance, adjusting to shifting light as the sun moves across the sky. They learn to distinguish the sway of trees from the movement of riders, the glint of sunlight on stone from the shimmer of metal. Hours stretch long when nothing stirs, yet vigilance cannot falter. A single missed detail could mean disaster for the villages below or the garrisons along the wall. At night, the towers become even more isolated. The darkness swallows the land, leaving only the faint light of stars and moon. Torches flicker weakly, casting shadows that make the world seem closer, more uncertain. Sounds rise sharper in the stillness. The distant call of an animal, the crack of a branch, the sigh of wind through grass. The watchers peer into the dark, their eyes burning from strain, their bodies stiff with fatigue. Sleep comes only in fragments, stolen in turns while others remain awake. In those hours, loneliness settles heavier than the night itself. To signal danger or movement. Towers were not silent. Fires were prepared at their tops, ready to be lit at a moment's notice. Smoke by day, flames by night, messages that leapt from one tower to the next, carrying warnings across miles faster than any messenger could run. The watchers tended these fires carefully, ensuring wood was dry, ensuring signals could rise instantly. The image of flames racing across horizons, tower to tower, is dramatic to imagine, but for the men who tended them, it was simply another duty to be ready always, even if years passed without the fire ever being lit. But perhaps the hardest challenge of the towers was not vigilance or weather, but time itself. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. A man could spend entire seasons seeing nothing but the same horizon, the same forests, the same valleys. He might grow familiar with every curve of the mountains, every bend of a river, every patch of grass. He could predict the paths of animals, the changes of clouds, the shifting of winds. And yet this familiarity bred not comfort, but monotony. Many men grew restless, their thoughts drifting far beyond the walls, their memories of families and villages more vivid than the life before them. Still, some found solace in the towers. The height gave them perspective, a sense of distance from the noise of life below. They grew accustomed to silence, even cherished it. They found beauty in the mist rising through valleys at dawn, in the glow of sunsets turning stone to gold, in the stars glittering brighter here than anywhere else. Some wrote poems on scraps of paper, others carved small marks into stone, leaving faint traces of their presence. These quiet acts of expression broke the monotony, turned the tower from prison into witness of small moments of humanity. The towers also shaped the rhythm of nearby villages. Farmers working fields looked up and saw the watchers outlined above, their presence both reassuring and unsettling. Children pointed to the towers, imagining the lives inside. Merchants passing through stopped at their bases, selling food and supplies, their voices drifting upward to the men on duty. The towers were not separate from life below. They were part of it, visible always, silent but constant. Anime often captures this presence, showing villages living under looming silhouettes of towers, where daily joy and struggle unfold under watchful eyes. Storms tested the towers most fiercely. Rain turned stone slippery, wind howled through cracks, snow piled in corners until paths disappeared. The watchers endured, their bodies shivering, their fingers numb. Fires smoked, arrows warped, food grew scarce. Yet they remained, their posts unbroken. Some fell ill, others weakened, but still the towers were manned. Abandoning them was not an option. Their endurance became the endurance of the wall itself, silent. Stubborn, unyielding Dot, to live as a watcher was to be forgotten. Few names survive, few records remain. They were not celebrated like generals, not remembered like emperors. Their reward was only survival, their legacy only the wall they guarded. And yet, without them, the wall would have been blind, powerless against distance. Their eyes, their patience, their vigilance gave the wall its purpose. Their silence is still there, echoing in the wind that whistles through abandoned towers, in the emptiness of stone rooms where once men sat waiting, in the gaps where smoke once rose into the sky dot. So when we see the Great Wall today, dotted with towers fading into the mist, we should not only see stone, we should see the men who stood in those towers, their hands tending fires, their eyes straining into horizons, their lives given to silence. They are the watchers of history, their stories unspoken, their presence woven into every block of stone dot as you let your thoughts drift tonight. Imagine standing in one of those towers. The air is cool, the mist rolls through valleys below, the land is endless. You rest your hand on the rough stone, feel the cold seeping into your skin. Around you, silence stretches, broken only by the faint cry of wind. You are alone, yet you are part of something vast. You are a watcher, one of countless forgotten guardians whose gaze kept the world turning, whose presence still lingers in the towers of the Great Wall. The Great Wall stretches across a land so vast and varied that no two sections are quite the same. It climbs mountains capped with snow, winds through deserts that shimmer with heat, crosses rivers that flood in spring, and runs along valleys where winds never rest. For those who built it, guarded it, or lived beneath it, the wall was not one place, but many, each season transforming it into something new. To endure life on the wall meant to endure not only duty or hardship, but also the cycles of nature itself, the long rhythm of seasons that returned year after year, wearing down stone and flesh alike. In summer, the wall burned. The stones, exposed to an unrelenting sun, absorbed heat until they glowed faintly in the air, too hot to touch with bare hands. Soldiers patrolling the ridges felt the soles of their sandals soften and burn against the stone, their clothes sticking to their bodies with sweat. Each step felt heavier, each breath slower. Water was precious, carried up in barrels from streams far below, rationed carefully so it would last. Guards standing in towers wiped sweat from their brows again and again, their eyes squinting against a horizon that shimmered with heat haze. Even the air seemed to weigh more, pressing down until thoughts grew sluggish. Yet there was no escape, no pause. The wall demanded vigilance even in the fiercest heat. Villagers below suffered too. Fields dried quickly under the blazing sun, and every drop of water became vital. Farmers rose before dawn to work while the air was still cool, but even then their skin darkened and cracked, their bodies bent low under the weight of harvest. Children splashed in rivers when they could, their laughter rising above the hum of cicadas, but even play was limited by thirst and fatigue. At midday, many retreated indoors, waiting in the dim shade of their homes until the worst of the heat passed. Yet still the wall loomed above, its stones glowing, its presence unmoved. To see it in summer was to see endurance itself, a structure standing beneath the same burning sky, patient and unyielding, as people struggled below. Winter brought the opposite, and in some ways it was harsher still. The wind howled down mountain ridges, cutting through armor and robes as if they were nothing. Snow gathered in thick drifts against the base of towers, piling so high that doors froze shut. Soldiers climbed battlements only to find the stones slick with ice, their breath fogging instantly in the air. Fingers numbed so quickly that bows and arrows became nearly impossible to use, swords too cold to grip. Men huddled together in towers, crowding around small fires that gave little warmth, the smoke stinging their eyes. Nights were endless, the cold pressing in like an enemy, relentless and silent. Villagers survived winter only with careful preparation. Food was stored months ahead, stacked in jars and baskets, salted and dried to last the season. Families slept close together, their breaths clouding the air in unheated rooms. Children wore layers of patched cloth, their cheeks red from the sting of frost. Every chore took longer, carrying water from frozen wells, gathering firewood and snow, walking to markets across icy paths. And always the wall loomed above, its towers capped with snow, its stones cracking faintly in the freeze. Yet even in this harshness there was beauty, the wall stretching white against blue skies, its outlines sharp and clear, like a painting brushed across mountains. Soldiers who shivered on its ridges sometimes paused, if only briefly, to marvel at the sight. Spring was different, a season of change. As snow melted, rivers swelled, flooding valleys, carrying away bridges, washing roads into mud. Soldiers waded through water, their sandals sinking, their clothes soaked. Towers dripped with moisture, stones slick with moss. Supplies spoiled quickly if not guarded, food rotted, grain grew mold. But spring also brought life. Flowers bloomed in valleys, trees budded green, and fields filled with color. Villagers planted crops, children ran barefoot again, animals grazed eagerly. For soldiers, spring meant both hardship and relief. The rains were heavy, the mud exhausting, but the warmth returned, and with it, hope. The wall in spring was alive, its stones glistening with rain, its ridges softened by new grass and blossoms dot. Then came autumn, the season of harvest and preparation. Farmers worked tirelessly, cutting rice, gathering millet, stacking grain in storage. Villages bustled with energy, markets filled with food, laughter carried into the cool air. Soldiers benefited too, their meals richer, their supplies more plentiful. The air was crisp but not cruel, the skies clear, the stones of the wall warm in the sun. Yet autumn was also the reminder of what was to come. Families hurried to store enough food for the winter ahead. Soldiers checked their firewood supplies. Commanders ordered repairs on towers before snow returned. The beauty of autumn, golden fields, red leaves, long sunsets, was always shadowed by the knowledge that hardship was close again. For those who lived on or near the wall, seasons were not just changes of weather. They were changes of survival. Each brought its own demands, its own rhythms, its own tests. To endure 1 year on the wall was to endure the cycle of burning heat, biting cold, soaking rains, and fleeting harvests. The wall itself bore the marks of these seasons. Stones cracked in winter, weathered in summer, moss grew in spring, dust coated in autumn. It stood not in spite of the seasons, but through them, shaped and reshaped by their endless rhythm. Time itself felt different on the wall. For soldiers, the seasons marked the only true sense of passing. Days blurred into one another, duties repeated endlessly. But the seasons reminded them of change, the weight of fur in winter, the lightness of robes in summer, the dripping of rain in spring, the rustle of leaves in autumn. Villagers felt it too, their lives tethered to planting, harvesting, preparing, enduring. The wall was constant, but around it life shifted with the seasons, as predictable as it was unrelenting. And through it all, people found moments of beauty. Soldiers watching sunsets after long patrols, villagers celebrating harvest festivals with lanterns, children marveling at snowflakes drifting onto their hands. These small joys carried them through, giving meaning to lives that might otherwise have been only toil. In anime, these rhythms reappear constantly. The summer festival episode, the winter snow scene, the spring blossoms, the autumn leaves. Each is a reminder that survival is not only hardship, but also beauty, that even in the shadow of great burdens, life finds ways to glow dot. So when we see the Great Wall today, stretching across mountains under changing skies, we must remember that it was not only stone, but also seasons that shaped it. The wall endured heat and cold, rain and snow, year after year, just as the people around it did. Its stones are not eternal in themselves. They are eternal because countless hands, countless bodies, countless lives endured the rhythm of seasons long enough to keep it standing dot. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself standing on the wall in each season. Feel the heat of summer stones under your feet, the sting of winter wind on your face, the weight of spring rain soaking your clothes, the crisp air of autumn filling your lungs. Around you, the land changes, yet the wall remains, stretching always onward, patient, unyielding. And in that constancy lies the truth of survival, not in defying the seasons, but in enduring them year after year, generation after generation, until time itself seems written into stone. Wherever the Great Wall stretched, roads seemed to follow it like shadows. Some were little more than dirt paths carved by endless footsteps, while others were worn deep by the wheels of carts and caravans. These routes were lifelines connecting villages, garrisons, and towns scattered along the vast frontier. For soldiers, they were supply lines. For villagers, they were links to markets. For travelers, they were dangerous but necessary paths. And for merchants, they were the very threads of survival. To live near the wall was not only to see its towers and stones, but also to hear the constant rhythm of feet, hooves, and wheels moving along its base. Imagine a narrow dirt road winding through a valley at dawn. The air is cool, the sky pale with the first light. Along this road comes a small caravan, merchants leading donkeys loaded with sacks of grain, bundles of cloth, jars of oil. Their steps are steady but cautious, eyes darting to the horizon. Soldiers on the wall above may watch them pass, their figures small from such heights. Dust rises behind them, marking their progress as they make their way toward a distant market town. For these merchants, every journey was a gamble profit if they reached their destination safely, ruin if they did not. Markets near the wall depended on such travelers. In villages tucked against its shadow, life grew brighter and busier on market days. Merchants unpacked their bundles, spreading out cloth dyed in vivid colors, tools that gleamed in sunlight, toys carved from wood, jars filled with spices or medicine. Villagers gathered eagerly, trading grain, vegetables, or livestock for what they could not produce themselves. Children tugged at their parents, their eyes wide at sweets or trinkets. Soldiers mingled too, buying food, sharpening their weapons at smiths' stalls, or simply enjoying the noise after weeks of silence on the wall. These markets were not only commerce, but culture, places where news spread, where strangers met, where life pulsed beneath the shadow of stone. Messengers traveled faster, moving along the same roads, but with urgency rather than trade. Clad in simple but durable clothing, carrying satchels filled with letters or scrolls, they ran or rode tirelessly, their lives bound to speed. Some carried messages between towers and garrisons, others linked distant regions, their journeys stretching for days or weeks. They paused briefly at inns or guard stations, changing horses, eating hurried meals, then pressed on again. Their steps were as vital as any stone in the wall, for without communication, the defenses of the frontier would falter. To be a messenger was to live in motion, to measure life in distances rather than days. In anime, when characters rush along roads carrying urgent news, or when plots hinge on messages that arrive just in time, these echoes of messengers still survive. The roads also carried travelers of all kinds. Some were wandering artisans, carrying their tools on their backs, offering repairs or crafts in villages along the way. Others were performers, with drums, flutes, and painted masks, bringing music and laughter to garrisons weary of silence. There were also families moving in search of better land, their carts piled high, children perched on top, animals tied behind. Each traveler added to the tapestry of life around the wall, each story leaving faint traces that have long since faded, but can still be. Imagine when standing on the stones today, the dangers of travel were constant. Bandits hid in forests, waiting to descend on caravans. Wolves prowled at night, their howls carrying through valleys. Rivers swelled with sudden rains, washing away crossings and stranding travelers for days. In winter, snow buried roads, freezing wheels in place, numbing fingers until reins slipped from hands. In summer, thirst threatened to break even the strongest, with wells too far apart and streams drying in the heat. To survive meant preparation, traveling in groups, carrying weapons, watching carefully for signs of trouble. Yet even with such caution, many journeys ended in loss. Stories of caravans attacked, messengers vanished, travelers swallowed by storms became part of the memory of the wall itself. Inns along these roads were havens of light in a landscape of risk. Small clusters of wooden buildings offered straw mats, bowls of hot broth, fires to warm stiff hands. Merchants sat together, counting coins, exchanging news of distant towns. Messengers ate quickly before dashing out again, their satchels never leaving their shoulders. Soldiers off duty sometimes joined, their armor piled in corners, their laughter loud in the smoky air. Travelers shared stories late into the night, their voices mingling with the creak of beams and the hiss of fire. These inns were brief respites, places where loneliness softened, where strangers became companions, if only until morning. Anime captures such moments often, the inn episode, where a journey pauses, where new friendships begin or secrets are revealed. The wall itself shaped these journeys more than most realized. Its presence meant safety in some places, danger in others. Travelers felt reassured under the eyes of its towers, believing soldiers might deter bandits. Yet the wall also drew attention, its garrisons consuming supplies, its presence attracting both commerce and conflict. To journey beside it was to journey along the line where power was strongest, where life clustered, where stories gathered. Every footprint, every wheeled track carved into the earth was part of a larger rhythm, the constant pulse of movement that kept the wall alive at night. When the roads grew quiet, the memory of footsteps lingered. Dust settled slowly, wheels no longer creaked, hooves no longer beat the earth. Villages dimmed, markets closed, inns fell silent as travelers slept. But the wall above remained, its towers dark, its stones cold, its watch unbroken. In that silence one could almost hear the faint echo of the day, the shouts of merchants, the cries of children, the clatter of carts, the hurried steps of messengers. These sounds faded quickly, swallowed by night, but they lived on in memory, written into the very soil dot. So when we think of the Great Wall today, we must not imagine it as only stone rising against mountains. We must remember the roads that traced its edges, the lives that passed along them, the constant flow of people whose journeys gave it meaning. Without them, the wall would have been an empty barrier. With them, it was a living artery, carrying goods, news, laughter, and fear across the land dot. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself on one of those roads. The dust clings to your sandals, the sun warms your back, and the wall stretches beside you like a silent companion. Around you, merchants call to one another, children laugh from carts. A messenger rushes past, his eyes fixed on distance. You walk steadily, knowing the road is long, but also knowing you are part of something larger, a flow of lives that has never truly stopped, even as centuries have passed. Behind the stones of the Great Wall, behind the endless sweat of workers and the long watches of soldiers, there was another presence, the silent weight of politics. The wall was never only a line of defense, it was also a line of power. Decisions made in distant halls determined who built it, who guarded it, who suffered beneath it, and who thrived from it. Lords and generals, governors and strategists, their names may be remembered in records, but their shadows stretched far longer than their lifetimes. For the people who lived in the wall's shadow, these powerful figures were both protectors and oppressors, both saviors and burdens. And though their voices are gone, the echoes of their politics are written into every stone. Imagine a general standing on a high tower, gazing outward at the land beyond. His robe flutters in the wind, his armor polished, his posture steady. But behind his stillness lies calculation. He measures not only the horizon, but also the needs of supply lines, the loyalty of his soldiers, the patience of the people, the orders arriving from capital cities far away. His decisions ripple downward like waves. More men pulled from villages to labor on repairs, more grain demanded from farmers to feed garrisons, more patrols ordered despite soldiers' fatigue. For those below, the general's choices were not abstract, but immediate, shaping their daily lives in ways that could not be escaped. Lords and governors treated the wall as both shield and stage. To maintain it was to show strength, to prove control over distant frontiers. But to neglect it, to let stones crumble or towers fall, was to invite accusations of weakness. Rival officials whispered, waiting for failure, ready to claim power if defenses slipped. Thus, politics wrapped around the wall as tightly as its stones wrapped around mountains. Every section stood not only on foundations of earth, but also on foundations of ambition and rivalry for the common soldier. This world of power was distant, yet inescapable. Orders came from above, unquestionable, carrying the weight of authority that could not be defied. A soldier might wonder why his garrison lacked food while grain was stored in abundance for officials. He might question why repairs were demanded in the dead of winter, why men were sent on patrols through storms that no enemy would dare cross. Yet such questions remained whispers, never spoken aloud. Loyalty was survival, and obedience was the only path through days that already demanded too much. For villagers, politics arrived as burdens disguised as duty. Taxes were raised to fund supplies, labor conscripted to repair walls or carry stones. Crops carefully harvested were loaded into carts and taken to feed soldiers, leaving families with less to survive the winter. Complaints found no ears willing to listen. To resist was to risk punishment. To obey was to endure. And yet many endured, not because they trusted their lords, but because survival offered no other choice. Their resilience became the invisible strength that upheld the ambitions of the powerful generals. Too, faced their own struggles. Their positions were coveted, their failures magnified. To command along the wall was to live under scrutiny, to balance between pleasing superiors and maintaining the loyalty of those beneath. Letters flew between posts and capitals, filled with reports of patrols, counts of arrows, requests for reinforcements or supplies. Every word carried weight. Every misstep could end a career. Politics at the wall was not always about grand battles or alliances. Often it was about paperwork, about appearances, about keeping one's place in a hierarchy that stretched as endlessly as the wall itself. The wall thus became a mirror of society's structure. At the top, lords and governors who rarely set foot on its stones but claimed credit for its endurance. Below them, generals and officers who managed garrisons, shouldering responsibility while navigating rivalries. Below them, soldiers who endured the daily grind of watch and patrol. And at the bottom, villagers and workers whose hands and backs carried the true weight, their suffering hidden beneath layers of command. Each level relied on the others, yet rarely acknowledged them. The wall was built of stone, but also of inequality, ambition, and silence. There were moments when these shadows of power grew darker. A governor might demand more than a village could give, leaving families hungry. A general might sacrifice men in pointless patrols to prove vigilance. An official might take credit for victories that belonged to ordinary soldiers. Corruption seeped into supplies, with grain diverted, weapons poorly made, funds stolen. These betrayals deepened resentment, though seldom spoken aloud. Still, the wall endured, not because of those at the top, but because of those at the bottom, whose labor and patience filled the gaps left by politics. And yet, politics was not only corruption or ambition. Sometimes powerful figures recognized the sacrifices beneath them. A wise general might reduce taxes during famine, ensuring villagers could survive. An officer might share supplies with his men rather than hoard them. A governor might invest in markets near the wall, encouraging trade that enriched villages as well as soldiers. These choices were rare but remembered, their memories softening the harshness of authority. Even in politics, there were moments of humanity, glimmers of compassion that stood out like lanterns in dark corridors of stone. For anime, these themes became timeless. The shadow of authority looming over ordinary lives, the conflict between loyalty and survival, the presence of corruption and rare compassion, all echo in stories where lords and generals shape destinies while common characters bear the weight. Whenever we see a plot where rulers play games of power while villagers suffer, whenever we see soldiers questioning orders but carrying them out regardless, we are seeing reflections of this history, the politics of the wall, written not only in records but in lives died at dusk. When the wall glowed under fading light, the shadows of towers grew long across the valleys below. In those shadows lay the invisible weight of decisions made far away, decisions that pulled at the threads of countless lives. Soldiers stood their posts, villagers tended their fields, workers carried stones, all beneath the unseen hand of politics. The wall was not only stone against invaders, but also stone against its own people, holding them in patterns of duty, loyalty, and endurance. So when we walk along the Great Wall today, we should not only admire its stones or marvel at its length. We should remember the power that flowed through it, the ambitions and rivalries that shaped it, the burdens carried downward through layers of command. The wall's silence hides these stories, but they are there still waiting in its cracks, whispered by the wind that sweeps through its towers. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself standing in one of those valleys. Above you, the wall stretches across mountains, its towers dark against the sky. Somewhere within those towers sits a general weighing decisions. Somewhere in a village below, a farmer gives up grain to pay a tax. Somewhere on the wall, a soldier obeys an order without question. And all of them, bound together, are part of the same shadow, the shadow of power, cast long across stone and time. Though the Great Wall is remembered as a structure of defense, it was also a line of connection. Where stones rose, roads followed, and where roads spread, trade blossomed. Along the shadow of the wall, the hum of commerce never ceased. Caravans rattled, hooves struck earth, voices haggled, coins clinked, and goods exchanged hands in rhythms as steady as footsteps. Silk glimmered in bundles, salt sparkled in blocks, tea leaves filled baskets, and countless small objects carried stories of lives far beyond the horizon. The wall was meant to divide, but in its shadow it became a bridge, tying people together through the constant flow of trade. Dot imagined standing in a small market town near the wall just after dawn. The air is cool, but the square is already alive. Merchants unpack their goods from donkeys and carts, laying cloths across wooden stalls. Bolts of silk, dyed in deep reds, blues, and golds, catch the morning light. Beside them are sacks of grain, baskets of vegetables, jars of oil, and bundles of dried herbs. A blacksmith hammers at a blade in the corner, the sound ringing sharp above the chatter. The smell of roasted food drifts through the air, carried by the breeze. Soldiers wander among the stalls, their armor clinking softly, pausing to buy small comforts after long weeks of patrol. Villagers crowd eagerly, bartering crops for salt, exchanging eggs for cloth, offering coins carefully saved for something special. Every exchange is simple, yet together they form the lifeblood of the frontier. Salt was among the most precious goods. More than just a flavor, it was survival itself. It preserved meat for winter, flavored bland meals, and restored strength after labor. Blocks of salt were carried on the backs of animals, wrapped carefully in straw to keep them from crumbling. Merchants guarded them as if they were silver, for salt could be traded for nearly anything. In villages along the wall, a pinch of salt in a pot of soup was not luxury but necessity. Families treasured it, stretching it carefully, measuring it grain by grain. To lack salt was to weaken, to endure illness, to suffer hunger more deeply. That is why salt merchants were welcomed cautiously, but eagerly, their arrival always marking relief. Silk, in contrast, was not about survival, but about beauty and value. Shimmering, smooth, and light, it traveled in rolls bound tightly with rope, carried carefully across miles. In frontier towns, silk was a marvel, its sheen dazzling in markets filled mostly with rough wool and homespun cloth. Wealthier families bought it for weddings, gifts, or garments meant to last generations. For soldiers, it was far beyond reach, admired from a distance as merchants unfolded it in the sun. Yet even so, silk carried not only wealth but identity. It was proof that trade stretched far, connecting distant lands. To see silk in a frontier market was to feel part of something larger, to know the world did not end at the horizon. Other goods filled the flow as well. Tea leaves, dried and packed into bricks, brought warmth and energy to weary soldiers and villagers alike. Iron tools gleamed on stalls, plows for farmers, knives for kitchens, nails for builders. Paper, brushes, and ink appeared too, carried by traveling scholars or traders who knew their worth. These items brought knowledge, connection, and expression into even the smallest settlements. Children marveled at toys carved from wood or painted with bright colors, simple delights that broke the monotony of daily life. Every object carried along the wall's roots bore meaning, shaping lives in ways both large and small. The road itself was alive with sound. Hooves clattered as horses and donkeys moved in lines. Carts creaked under heavy loads. Drivers shouted commands, dogs barked. Children laughed as they chased one another between stalls. The air was never still. Even when bandits threatened or storms delayed, the flow of trade resumed as soon as it could, because life depended on it. Villages without trade grew thin and quiet. Those with it bustled with color and sound. The wall itself seemed to listen, its stones absorbing the constant hum of exchange, the whispers of deals, the rhythm of footsteps carrying goods from one horizon to another. For the merchants, every journey was risk and reward. Bandits lurked in forests, storms flooded roads, animals collapsed beneath loads. A broken wheel, a lost animal, a stolen sack could mean ruin. Yet merchants endured, their lives bound to the road, their survival tied to the willingness to risk it again and again. They learned every path, every dangerous bend, every safe inn. They carried not only goods, but also news. Rumors of battles, stories of distant towns, whispers of crops good or bad. In this way, merchants became more than traders. They were the threads that stitched together communities across vast distances. Messengers carried speed rather than goods, but they too were part of this flow. Their satchels carried letters, orders, news of taxes, warnings of raids. To see a messenger ride through a market was to feel the pulse of the larger world, to know that life beyond the wall was still connected to the villages beneath it. Their urgency reminded everyone that while trade brought comfort, politics and danger never rested far away. Even the smallest exchanges carried weight. A farmer trading eggs for salt, a soldier bartering his extra rations for a new pair of sandals, a child clutching a wooden whistle bought with a single coin. All were part of the flow that gave meaning to the wall's shadow. Life here was not only about defense or endurance. It was about exchange, about connection, about the constant hum of people giving and receiving, shaping one another's lives in ways they might never fully realize. At dusk, when the market closed and caravans departed, silence returned slowly. Merchants packed their goods, tying ropes tight, checking animals, preparing to move again. Villagers carried baskets home, their arms heavy, but their spirits lifted. Soldiers returned to their posts, chewing dried meat bought from stalls, their steps lighter than before. The square emptied, but the dust still hung in the air, the memory of noise still humming faintly. Above it all, the wall stood silent, its towers watching, its stones cold. Yet within its shadow, life had pulsed vibrantly, as it always did. So when we think of the Great Wall today, we should not only see defense and division. We should also hear the whispers of trade, the rustle of silk, the crunch of salt, the murmur of voices bartering, the laughter of children clutching toys, the footsteps of merchants who bound the world together. The wall divided, yes, but it also united, drawing people into its orbit, shaping lives through the constant rhythm of exchange. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself in one of those markets. The sun is setting, lanterns are being lit, and the last trades of the day are taking place. You hear the call of a merchant offering cloth, the clink of coins changing hands, the creak of carts preparing to leave. You taste a pinch of salt on your lips, feel the softness of silk between your fingers, smell roasted food drifting through the air. Around you, life hums, vibrant, fragile, enduring. And above it all, the Great Wall stands silent, holding within its shadow not only soldiers and stones, but the whispers of trade that once carried the flow of life itself. The Great Wall of China is often described as timeless, yet time has always been its truest companion. Stones that once gleamed with fresh mortar now bear cracks where moss has crept in. Towers that once stood sharp against the horizon now crumble, their bricks scattered in the grass. Paths once filled with the footsteps of soldiers, merchants, and villagers are quiet, save for the wind sweeping across ridges. And yet, though centuries have worn its body, the spirit of the wall remains, echoing through memory, whispering stories that history books often forget. For generations, the wall was not a tourist site or symbol, but a living presence. Families lived beneath it, soldiers patrolled it, traders followed its shadow, and workers built and rebuilt its stones. To them, it was not grand history, but daily reality. They measured it not in miles, but in footsteps, not in centuries, but in seasons. Their names have faded, but their lives gave the wall its true legacy. Without them, it would be only stone. With them, it became a living artery of survival. Now, when visitors walk along restored sections, they often marvel at the view. They see the wall stretch like a ribbon across the mountains, endless and mighty. But the stones they touch carry silent stories. A crack might have been worn by the hand of a guard leaning wearily on a long night watch. A smooth step might have been shaped by the sandals of thousands of workers. A faded mark on a tower might have been carved quietly by a lonely soldier, his way of leaving proof that he existed. These traces are not visible unless imagined, but they are still there, hidden in silence. The forgotten legacy of the wall is not only in defense or politics, but in humanity. It is in the exhaustion of builders who bent beneath loads, in the patience of watchers who stared into distance, in the resilience of villagers who lived in its shadow, in the determination of merchants who carried goods along its roads. It is in the laughter of children playing beneath towers, in the songs sung by workers to keep rhythm, in the quiet moments when a soldier looked at the stars and felt both small and infinite. These moments do not appear in chronicles, but they are the heart of the wall's story. Time transformed the wall from necessity into memory. When wars shifted and threats moved, sections of the wall were abandoned. Stones were taken by villagers to build homes. Fields were planted where towers once stood. Grass grew where soldiers once marched. Yet even as it crumbled, the wall did not vanish. Its remnants shaped the land. Its presence lingered in stories. Its silhouette remained on horizons. To live near it was still to live with history, whether in ruins or strength. Today, when people from across the world visit, they bring their own footsteps to paths that once carried lives now forgotten. They see grandeur, but what they do not see is the endurance behind it. They see stone, but what they do not see is the flesh and spirit that made it possible. The wall has become symbol, but beneath the symbol lies the truth, a truth of ordinary people, of countless hands, of quiet lives that mattered. That is its true legacy, one that does not fade even when stones crumble. In many ways, the wall is like memory itself, parts clear, parts broken, parts lost, yet together still forming a whole. It is an echo that grows softer but never disappears, carried across centuries by wind, by silence, by imagination. To walk along it now is to walk with ghosts, not of fear, but of endurance, of resilience, of lives that shaped a monument greater than themselves. So when we speak of the Great Wall, we should not only think of its length, its height, or its stones. We should remember its humanity. We should remember that its forgotten legacy lies not only in towers or bricks, but in the people who gave themselves to it. Their stories were whispered once, carried on winds that swept across battlements. And if we listen closely, those whispers can still be heard, echoing through time, reminding us that history is not only what is recorded, but also what is endured. As you let your thoughts drift tonight, imagine yourself walking along a quiet, weathered section of the wall. Grass grows between the stones, the air is still, the horizon stretches endlessly. Your footsteps echo faintly, blending with the countless footsteps that came before. You run your hand across the rough surface, and for a moment, you feel the presence of those forgotten lives, builders, soldiers, villagers, merchants, all of them still here, woven into stone, carried into silence, waiting in echoes that will never fade. We have walked a long journey together, tracing the Great Wall not only as stone and monument, but as a living world. We have seen soldiers standing guard through sleepless nights, their patience stretched as wide as the horizon. We have watched villagers carry on their lives in its shadow, raising families, working fields, sharing laughter even as the wall loomed above them. We have stood beside the builders, their hands raw, their backs bent, their strength pressed into stone until their names were forgotten, but their effort eternal. We have climbed the towers where watchers gazed into mist and silence, waiting endlessly for dangers that often never came. We have followed merchants and messengers along dusty roads, their footsteps binding together towns and markets, their goods and news flowing like rivers beside the wall. We have felt the seasons change, burning summers, freezing winters, heavy rains, golden harvests, each reshaping the wall and the lives around it. And finally we have listened to the echoes of time, the whispers of forgotten lives that still linger within the stones. The Great Wall is remembered as defense, but it was always more. It was labor and loneliness, trade and community, hardship and resilience. It was a place where ordinary people lived extraordinary endurance, where history was not only written in battles but in daily survival. Every crack in its stones carries memory. Every worn step remembers feet that passed long ago. Every tower that crumbles still holds the silence of eyes that once looked outward. Its true story is not one of emperors or conquest alone, but of countless human lives bound together across centuries. Today, when we see the wall stretching across mountains, it may feel eternal, yet it is fragile. Fragile because memory itself is fragile. Stones may last, but voices fade unless we choose to remember them. By telling their stories, by imagining their lives, by hearing the whispers hidden in the cracks, we keep them alive. That is the forgotten legacy of the Great Wall. Not just defense, not just power, but humanity itself. So as you prepare to rest tonight, carry with you the calm of this journey. Picture the wall at sunset, its stones glowing gold, its towers casting long shadows across valleys. Hear the distant murmur of a market, the soft steps of soldiers, the laughter of children below. Feel the cool wind sweeping along its ridges, carrying echoes of centuries past. Let those echoes soothe you, reminding you that endurance and resilience are woven into the very stones of history. and that quiet strength lives in all who came before. If you have found peace in these travels through forgotten time, remember to leave a like and subscribe so that the next story, waiting in silence, may reach you as well. Until then, rest well and let the whispers of the Great Wall guide you gently into dreams.